Thank you, Brian, for joining Zooming In today.
Great to be with you, Simone, as always.
Let's talk about the Ukraine situation a little bit. The latest news is that yesterday, Russia announced multiple military drills across its territory, spanning from the Pacific Ocean to the areas around Ukraine. And this is after the United States and NATO's military moves aimed at deterring a Russian incursion into Ukraine. So, in your opinion, what's the danger of a real military conflict between Russia, Ukraine, US, and the NATO?
Well, I think they're real. Uh, I think there'll be a miscalculation probably if that actually happens. The United States, look, as a practical matter, should be engaging in a foreign policy that could deter Russia or Communist China or anyone in the world from trying to engage in military action. Now, what Russia will think is, why is Ukraine in the United States' interest? Why are they involved? And it looks like we, the United States, and some of our European allies, not all, have been supporting Ukraine with the interest of getting them possibly to join NATO, as if we're expanding NATO. And Russia is going to look at that as a very provocative act because it's right on their border. Most Americans will wonder, why are we engaging in anything that might provoke war with Russia? Why is that in our interest? And they'd be right about that. And the Democrat Party in the United States and the Obama administration and the Biden administration, they've taken this very provocative approach towards Russia over the years. And anybody who criticizes that is considered somehow a puppet of Vladimir Putin, when in fact anybody who is taking a hard look at this should say, why are we trying to drive the Russians into the arms of the Chinese even more than they already are? Why alienate Russia? I mean, they're not good guys by any stretch, but why force them into a deeper alliance with Communist China? Why does that serve American interests? Seems to me only to serve Chinese interests. And so we're on track today to possibly and unfortunately engage in conflict with Russia over Ukraine. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Hopefully people will realize this is not really serious, because we're not going to engage in a full-scale war against Russia. We're not going to risk American troops against Russia. And so this looks like a lot of posturing and political theater that may cost Ukraine at the end of the day. Putin is an aggressive guy, of course, and he'll want to expand his sphere of influence if he can. And the fact that America has been so weak over the last year gives him some encouragement that he can go into Ukraine and get away with it. And so the problem here is American weakness has been and is today a very provocative thing. And it looks to me that if we do head to war, that will be a most unfortunate thing, both for us and for Ukraine.
Right. Just before I talked to you today, I talked to a local Ukrainian this morning, and he told me that he doesn't think Russia will invade Ukraine because Ukraine is just so big. It's almost in essence, the usable territory of Ukraine is almost as big as that of Russia. So there's no way that Russia can occupy Ukraine. So if that's the case, why do you think Russia is putting so many forces around Ukraine? Why is Putin threatening war with Ukraine?
Well, he wants to have influence over Ukraine, doesn't he? He doesn't have to invade if he can threaten them and then have influence over them. If he can threaten them and get away with it, or do something, to have political advantage, he has succeeded in his political objective. And
Okay.
so all this posturing, all these military maneuvers, all these, war games, rehearsals, however you want to phrase it, that they're having over there in, on the border with Ukraine, it's either preparation for war or it's designed to have a political effect. They'll want to see how the world responds. Does the United States push back? Do the Ukrainians push back? What does this mean? And if they can get away with it, they will. And if they think they don't get political advantage, they'll take a step back. And Putin will find a way of coming out on top regardless. He'll say he was just, engaging in normal military maneuvers in order to secure the defense of Russia against an aggressive NATO, alliance that looks to diminish Russia. I mean, he'll say something like that, right? I mean, this is a man who is a dictator in his own right, and he'll want to do whatever it takes to make him look good and to diminish the West while making sure he gets whatever political advantage, as I say, he can out of it. And he's very good at that and has been very good at that.
Right. And in that regard, do you think the U.S. has handled the the U.S.-Russia relationship very poorly during this administration?
Well, during this administration, I say yes. I mean, during the Trump administration, it was Russia, 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 and it was all, Russia is the problem in the world as opposed to communist China. But Putin would never have thought of doing this if Donald Trump were president because he would be unsure of how Donald Trump would respond, of course. So he wouldn't take that risk. Here you have Joe Biden, who looks compromised when it comes to the Ukraine and Russia. You know, the family relationships of the Bidens with both the Ukraine and with Russia are very suspect. And so he'll think, much like the communist Chinese do, that they have compromised Joe Biden and can get away with certain things. And they look at the Biden administration and how they handled Afghanistan, and that doesn't seem to be very good. And they'll probably, make these calculations, and they'll think the Biden administration doesn't know what it's doing. It didn't withdraw from Afghanistan the right way. It looked weak, and so maybe we can get away with this. At minimum, we can embarrass the Biden administration and further diminish the Biden administration. And it's an old sort of Cold War calculus that communists, I'm still putting Vladimir Putin in the communist camp, communists like to embarrass liberals. And here you have a case of a communist embarrassing once again a liberal. And it's something they've been doing for the better part of 80 years.
Right, right. Obviously, we do not know if Putin and Xi Jinping had a secret meeting together, but we do know that China flew more fighter jets in Taiwan's airspace during this Ukraine crisis. The thing is, if America did get into a military conflict with Russia over Ukraine, it will definitely not be able to take on China in the Taiwan Strait. So, wouldn't that be an opportunity for Xi Jinping? What do you think?
Well, I think that's very well formulated the way you just said that. Uh, Look, when we think about relations with Russia and communist China, it begins with the fact that they're both nuclear superpowers, and they have nuclear weapons, and we have nuclear weapons. And the worry always between Russia, China, and the United States is that some kind of minor military conflict will escalate into a nuclear conflict, right? That's the problem. Remember back in, I believe it was 1995, that a Chinese lieutenant general said to the American ambassador, Charles Freeman, he said that don't really interfere with PRC Taiwanese relations because you in America value Los Angeles more than you do Taipei,
Mm-hmm.
meaning you wouldn't want to do anything. This is a long time ago. This is 1995. He was making the point that you would not want to do something that would escalate into a nuclear conflict between communist China and the United States. that would be a bad thing. And in that period of time, we've not had conflict. We've not had, communist China invading Taiwan, but the Chinese are very patient. They're very strategic. I think they have been watching how the United States has responded for the past 50 years to the possibility of a reunification between Taiwan and Communist China. And they've looked at the preparations militarily that the United States have been making. During that period of time, we never built a national missile defense of the kind that would take that nuclear threat off the table. And so today, when we talk about communist China invading Taiwan and America intervening, you still have that nuclear question being, examined. Would communist China use nuclear weapons to actually attack an American battle group or just, actually strike the American homeland with nuclear weapons and actually provoke a nuclear war over Taiwan? Now, in some ways, people think, well, gosh, that's never going to happen. And we hope it never happens. But a strategic miscalculation could be made. And in that kind of a conflict, you could have nuclear war. And that would be a most unfortunate thing, just given the fact that we don't have a national missile defense. And once you start a nuclear war, you don't really know where that ends. And so that's the great worry here. Would communist China attack? How would the United States respond? What would happen if communist China sunk a U.S. aircraft carrier? What would that mean, right? What would that do to provoke? It would reset world affairs, in my judgment. We haven't had that in our lifetime. And so I think the possibility of real escalation and real danger are present here. There's also the case that because we don't have a national missile defense and nuclear weapons are being talked about, that doesn't mean that there's a green light for communist China to invade Taiwan,
Mm.
right? There'd be a lot of ramifications of all that. The Taiwanese have a very robust semiconductor industry that is absolutely mission critical to the United States and global economy. If communist China tried to take over Taiwan, it would be necessary either for the Taiwanese themselves to destroy that semiconductor industry, or it might even lead to the conditions where the United States might militarily decide to destroy that semiconductor industry, as radical as that sounds, right? But we're
Wow.
talking about international politics at a level where if communist China took over Taiwan, that would have a huge strategic impact on the US economy. And what would the United States do to protect their interests? It's not just the freedom of the people of Taiwan, which is very important for the United States. We do want Taiwan to be free, but we also want that semiconductor industry to be in the hands of the free Taiwanese people and not have it fall into the hands of communist China. And if that did happen, it would have enormous strategic implications for the United States. And it's not really clear how we would respond given the circumstances, which is why the United States needs a much more robust military than it currently has, and a significant push toward a national missile defense, which we today do not possess or adequately possess to stop a Russian or a Chinese or a ship launched ballistic missile launched at the United States.
Is the US making progress on that? Is working on that? I mean, how far is the US from developing a sufficient anti-missile system?
Years and years away, given the rate we're going. We're not serious about it today. President Trump was very serious about it. He talked about building a space force, and the key component of a space force was that it would have a huge ability to provide national missile defense for the United States and our allies and our troops abroad. And so we're talking about having the necessary military investment in order to engage in international politics, as it were. If we're going to talk about deterring communist China or Russia, that begins by building a national missile defense. Today, we don't have that. We have a rudimentary system that can stop some North Korean missiles. We have a ship-based missile defense that can deal with certain other problems or certain other challenges. But the other side, Russia and China, they're preparing for war and investing in the kind of military that can project power. We in the United States have been focused on fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and not investing adequately in building our own missile defense or even building our own nuclear arsenal to adequately deter the Russians and the Chinese. Like when people talk about conflict with, China and the United States over Taiwan, if China, communist China, were really going to attack Taiwan, they would also attack, it would seem to me logical, to attack American forces in Japan, right? To make sure that those forces in Japan could not assist in the defense of Taiwan. Well, then you're talking almost about a world war, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're talking about the attack of Japan and Taiwan and the United States. That's a serious thing. Now, is communist China going to do that? Well, they might do that if they think they can get away with it. But that's a real roll of the dice for them because you don't know how the Japanese would respond. You don't know how the United States would respond. Right now, we're not in an optimal situation, but neither are they. They could engage in this kind of a conflict and it could backfire on the communist Chinese. And so this whole thing is a very risky enterprise. And
Yeah.
they could make the kind of miscalculation where they think they can get away with it, but they might be
Right.
wrong.
Well, one comforting thought on this might be that Xi Jinping's top priority right now is to get a third term in the 20th Party Congress this fall. The factious fights are so intense that he doesn't have any energy to do anything else. But ironically, if he feels that there is a big chance that he won't get a third term this fall, he might risk a war with Taiwan to try to stay in power. So balance is really important. Let's go back to Ukraine. What do you think America would do since Taiwan is strategically more important than Ukraine? Do you think the US will purposely not get engaged in conflicts with Russia in case something happens in the Taiwan Strait?
Well, we might engage in a lot of posturing in both places, believing that posturing, sending troops over there, sending battle groups or strike groups over to the Taiwan Straits, believing that that kind of posturing will deter Russia and China. That might work. Posturing may be enough, or at least the Biden administration may think that's enough. But at the end of the day, Russia is going to do what they think they can get away with. And if they think they can get away with invading Ukraine, what is the Biden administration going to do? What is NATO going to do? I would argue it's going to do nothing. If it does something, I think Russia will believe it is capable of driving out whatever forces it needs to. Russia is only going to go into Ukraine if they're committed to making sure that they can win. If they don't think they're going to win, then if it's not guaranteed they're not going to do it, why risk it? But if they think they can get away with it, I wouldn't be surprised if they did it. And the Biden administration has been so feckless about this, just so unserious about this, that itself may be provocative for the Russians. Now, I worry about that lack of seriousness on the part of the United States and the Biden administration might also be provocative when it comes to Taiwan. That, of course, Taiwan is in the strategic interest, the defense of Taiwan is in the strategic interest of the United States. But again, Communist China is a nuclear superpower. We don't have a national missile defense. Are we going to risk nuclear war over Taiwan? That seems unlikely. But in the same sense, if Communist China goes and attacks Taiwan, the thing they will want the most from a strategic point of view is that semiconductor industry. That is an industry that can be destroyed. It's a physical thing. It's a plant. It's not human beings. If the Taiwanese destroyed that semiconductor industry, then Taiwan may be a less attractive asset for Communist China to grab. Now, if Communist China just wants Taiwan because symbolically they believe it's part of China, then they don't care about that. They may be willing to risk war over that, war with the United States. They may be willing to risk nuclear war over that. The Communist Chinese do not care about human life the way we in the West do. They may be willing to roll the dice. The Communist Chinese have wanted to reset world affairs for some time. And so if they and the Russians think that they can move on Ukraine and move on Taiwan and engage in war with the United States and win, get the United States to withdraw from the world stage and to, in effect, become the dominant superpowers of the world, if they think they can do that and get away with it, they may very well. And they will believe they can do it and get away with it because the United States and the Biden administration doesn't know what it's doing. Now, I hope they're wrong about that. I hope Biden administration does know what it's doing. But right now, it's not signaling that they do by the way they're talking in public, because it looks like posturing and bluster rather than a cold realism of what it will take to defend the interests of the United States.
Yeah. Let's wait for Secretary Blinken's decision this week about Ukraine and see how it will go. Let's talk about your recent article about the Winter Olympics in Beijing, published on Real Clear Politics. What's your take on the Winter Olympics?
Well, I make the case in that article for boycotting the Beijing Olympics. And we have the fact that the communist Chinese engage in all sorts of human rights abuses in their own country when it comes to the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong, the forced organ harvesting, the sex slavery of the Uyghur women. The Chinese Communist Party does so many bad things to the people of China itself, not just the Uyghurs or the Falun Gong, but the people of China itself, that it represses them and does so many bad things to them that would be grounds enough for the United States Olympic team to boycott the Olympic. But we also have the fact that for the last 2 years, the CCP virus has destroyed the American way of life. Here in the United States, we're still wearing masks, we're still taking vaccines. To go to a restaurant, you have to show a vaccine card. Life is not back to normal. The American way of life that we lived 3 years ago is not yet back. That is because of the CCP virus, because of the fact that the Chinese Communist Party let that virus go from Wuhan, China, to the rest of the world while they prevented it from going to the rest of China. And so the entire world caught COVID-19, got sick, we locked down the economies, and life as we know it has not yet returned. Look at all these protests in Europe, look at all the protests around the world. Over the weekend, there were 181 cities where there were protests to the policies regarding COVID-19. We've not gotten back to normal. In America, 850,000, more than 850,000 Americans have died. They have done much to ruin our way of life. At minimum, just out of a certain kind of self-respect, the United States might say, we're not going to participate in your Olympics. That doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is living as free people, getting back to normal here in the United States. Has the Communist Chinese Party ever apologized for COVID-19, for letting the virus spread throughout the world? No. Have they ever given us the actual genomic sequence of the virus? No. They have lied the whole time about it. They have been counterproductive. They have been manipulative. And in the face of all that, to send our US Olympic team over there seems to me a real denigration of American prestige and American self-respect, and a certain lack of common sense. We don't know how our athletes are going to be treated while they're over there. We don't know what viruses they're going to be exposed to, what kind of treatment they're going to be exposed to. And really, as a sign that we're willing to defend our way of life, our Olympic team should stay home. Meaning we're not going to send our diplomats, but we're still sending a team there. It's going to be on NBC. All sorts of American advertisers are going to, promote the games over 2 weeks. And it's going to be a celebration, I argue, of the Chinese way of life rather than the American way of life. Well, I personally am not going to be part of celebrating the Chinese way of life. And I think if most Americans realize what's going on here, neither will they.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who decides whether the US team goes to China or not?
Well, I would think it would be the U.S. Olympic Committee, but the U.S. Olympic Committee still would be subject to the American government. And so
Mm,
if President Biden decided that we weren't going to go there, we wouldn't go there. Um,
I see.
and so it really is up to him.
Okay. Yeah, there's no point to go to attend the Winter Olympics in Beijing. There's just no reason for that. I would say it's a shame. Well, thank you so
It's a
much,
real, it's a
Brian.
real, it's a
Yeah,
real embarrassment,
yeah,
frankly, that we're free people who believe in, human rights, and that's nothing that we will see over there in communist China. They will show the world that they're the superior power, that they were able to kill millions of people around the world and get away with it. They were effectively able to engage in biowarfare against the world and do it with impunity. And for the United States to go over there is a shameful thing.
right. And I talked to people living in Beijing. They are not looking forward to the Winter Olympics. They just see this as a pressure, as a stress, yet another stress on their life because the government control is going to be more severe, and they will be tested multiple times by the community and all that stuff. It will affect their life severely. So they do not like that. So there's no reason. Yeah.
There's no reason. I mean, they're already living in a repressive government. And so this will only add to that, add to all that. But I'm trying to look at this not from a, forgive me, communist Chinese point of view. Or, even if, look, I think the people of China are a good people, a great people, the people of China.
Yeah,
But the Chinese Communist Party, who is really the ones who are in charge.
yeah,
And the last thing we should be doing is celebrating the Chinese Communist Party. And that is exactly what's going to go on during these Olympics.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. These are all my questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, Simone, great to be with you as always. Thank you for your diligence and really getting to the bottom of all the crises in the world today, especially those dealing with communist China.
Thank you.